Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
If you're lost and you're lonely, go and figure out why. Take a trip to your dark side. Go on and have a good cry. 'Cause we're all lonely. We're all lonely together. I want to see your sadness. I want to share your sin. I want to bleed your blood and I want to be let in. Don't you just, don't we all just want to be together? Leave what's heavy behind. Leave what's heavy behind. If your face is down, well, take a look around. Do your fingers move? Do your lungs inflate? Are you tired? Are you weary of the hidden hate you've been holding? Did you lose that love or have you never had it? Are you feeling sad 'cause you did a bad thing? Yeah, leave what's heavy heavy behind. When I am lost inside my mind, sing me the hope I cannot find. When my despair has left me blind, sing me the tune I've left behind. Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me? Sing of the goodness I cannot see. Will you sing over me? When all the grief pours through my hands, when I've forgotten who I am, can't feel anything but shame, sing out and give me back my name. Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me? Sing of the goodness I cannot see. Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me? When I sink down beneath the fear, the weight is more than I can bear. Keep singing though I cannot hear. One day I'll sing for you, I swear. Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me? Sing of the goodness I cannot see. Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me? Sing of the goodness I cannot see. Will you sing over me? Will you sing over me?
Hey, Crosspointe. So many of you know me already, but for those of you who don't, I'm Shanika, the Early Childhood Director. Now, before I get started with the announcements, I have one thing that I really need to say, and that is Happy Father's Day to all those dads out there. Thank you for your time, for your love, for your care, for your dedication, for getting the kids riled up before bedtime. Thank you for all the ways that you make your kids' lives special. Thank you for showing up. Happy Father's Day. Now, something important you'll need to know is that Crosspointe doesn't hold in-person services for 3 of our summer holidays. So that's Memorial Day, July 4th, and Labor Day. So we won't hold in-person services on July 5th. It's a time for us to rest and recharge. So we won't gather in person, but you can join us for online service that Sunday, and then you can join us in person that following Sunday. something else I need to tell you is that Crosspointe is funded by your generosity. And so I'd like to give you an opportunity to partner with us financially. And there are a couple of ways you can do that. First, you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute, or you can text crosspointenc to 77977, and a link will be sent to your phone, and you can choose how you give from there. Thanks. Lastly, I know that Crosspointe's available all over the world, but for those of you who are local, I want to encourage you to get involved. Volunteers are the heart of what we do at Crosspointe, and our impact is far-reaching. I was a volunteer before I ever became a staff member, and I didn't realize my impact until I started working with the volunteers. So there's a few ways that you can volunteer, and we have a dedicated page for that. So you want to go to crosspoint.org/volunteer. You can see all of the different volunteering opportunities, and if you're interested, you can fill out the interest form and we'll get you more information. Thank you so much. Have the best week. We love you.
As the peaceable kingdom of the Garden of Eden fades, that it got spoiled by its first two tenants because of the irresistible allure of an apple. It all gets ruined, and we go on to read that humanity is, to put it lightly, struggling to get along with itself, and it's getting worse. We're only just starting the 6th chapter of a book that has 1,200 total chapters, and we are already reading, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of humans was great in the earth, and that every inclination of their thoughts, the thoughts of their hearts, was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made the humans on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart." Now, we should always pause on a text like this, because we have to understand and appreciate the literary devices, the storytelling rhetoric in play. Or we might think that we're supposed to only take this, accept it, or reject it on the basis of whether or not it's historical or not. But that's not fair to the text. The Lord, we're told, sees the wickedness of human beings. That's judgment of a collective behavior of people, and that's understandable. We certainly can understand that in our own time. But then it says, God saw every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. Every tendency, all evil, all the time. Obviously, that is an overstatement. This is how it sounds when a regular person has run out of steam a little bit. They are writing something from a hope-strained, cynical place. They're feeling judgmental. They lack the ability to apply nuance. They're just feeling really negative. But it doesn't mean it's as true as the strong feeling behind the writing of it. And it's followed by, "And the Lord was sorry that he had made humans on the earth." I mean, this is industrial strength, shame, and guilt when you're so awful that you can grieve the heart of a God that sees things coming anyway. But make no mistake, it is describing things getting really bad, even as it's using these huge dramatic storytelling devices to drive that point home. A few verses later, God is explaining this situation to a man named Noah, and we read, "The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now, I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark." And then gives specific instructions about how to do so, and the whole thing about the animals and pairs and all that follows. But catch why this is happening in the first place. God is violently flooding the earth because of the violence of humanity. People aren't just described as sinners in a generic sense. People have become violent toward one another, and their violence has made the whole world an awful place. And so God is going to out-violence them, blot them out. And again, before we move on, think about how you can maybe understand the author's sentiment here. Think about the people who come to mind when it just seems like they don't care about anything but themselves. They'll step on anyone to accomplish their will. People with power doing this. Those who seem to have no qualms about ruining things for everybody else, with their power because they have no purpose other than to serve their own appetites or their agendas. Think about how you maybe have thought or said when you just ran out of patience. I wish they'd take a long walk off of a short pier. So the sentiment in these ancient pages is not all that alien if you'll receive it not as a documentary of God's actual behavior and feelings, which would be a documentary of God's lack of creative problem solving, but it's a parable rooted in human reality, human emotions, like Jesus almost exclusively used to communicate wisdom and truth millennia later. Before even the physical violence started, we're being told a story in this flood story about people differing with each other, which is inevitable, dividing from one another, that's often necessary, but then on the heels of that disconnect, that divide, they have no ability or skill set to collaborate, to respect each other, to have peace between themselves, and so violence ensues. Philosopher Peter Rollins said it better than anyone ever, in my opinion. He says, war isn't conflict. War is the inability to handle conflict. War doesn't have to be war, nations or tribes fighting each other to the death. War can just be your disposition toward other people in your life. But conflict isn't the issue. It's the inability to handle conflict. The world presented to us in Genesis is collapsing, not under the strain of cuss words and pleasure seeking, under the weight of mishandled conflict. Conflict is inevitable. If you don't want conflict, stay alone, stay indoors. The problem is when inevitable conflict is allowed to break connection. And then from broken connection comes the eventual inflicting of pain on the other. So when we're shown a picture of God here and take it, as some of us believe we have to, as a literal documentary, we're going to get stuck with a God who was seemingly creative enough to create creation a few chapters earlier, but is so lacking in creativity that this same God can only think to use violence to end violence. This is a God that doesn't know what to do with conflict, so can only declare war. This is a God that has no understanding or interest in understanding, but only the ability to grieve outward behavior and react. And I know this talk can make some of you uncomfortable, and I understand that, because you maybe were taught, like I was, that the only respectful approach to a biblical text was to accept it as literal and rightly prescriptive. So let me keep going and say yes with you to an invitation from the text itself. Noah builds his boat, puts his family members aboard, along with 7 pairs, not just 2, but 7 pairs of what his culture called clean animals, and then just 1 pair of the unclean animals, seals the door, rains come, waters rise, the world is flooded. Legitimate questions can be raised if this has to be regarded as a true historical event. Like, how is it that no other people survived on the whole planet? All the other boats, all the floating debris and the wreckage, nobody else pulled through on the whole planet? And what about birds that can fly longer than 40 days, like swifts and frigate birds and albatrosses? I mean, some of those birds can fly for years without landing. What killed them? And like, why kill zebras or kangaroos for what people were doing to each other, but not whales and dolphins? And frankly, why a flood in the first place? Because if this was based on the righteous power of the Almighty and to get rid of people, one snap of the heavenly fingers, and it could have been everybody had a heart attack. Game over globally. That's way more efficient. If killing off everybody is the goal, right? You could have just done it that way. Why the flood? Now, Noah and the global cardiac arrest isn't as cute in a children's book or nursery wallpaper, but it's far more humane, wouldn't you think? I know I'm bringing some snark here, but please understand that these are also just logic questions for a text that's been misrepresented to very many of us as historic and literal and immune then to logic questions. But these questions are completely fair. So rather than trying to treat it that way, it's far more respectful to understand the text on its own terms rather than what maybe our particular tradition demands we believe about it, so that we can talk about it and grow in wisdom together. So let's follow it on its own terms, in its own context, and see what we might be able to learn from it next. According to the story, the flood happens, and then after just over a month, the flood recedes, and the earth, we assume, is a muddy graveyard where everything has to restart. And God explains several things to Noah and his family, but it's no less than that. You've got to restart. But God is also depicted as saying something else. As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh." So the rainbow is a sign for God to remember. It's presented as a promise that God reminds God's self about. God is never going to flood the whole earth again. It's a peace treaty. And there's a few interesting notes. God gives this sign in front of Noah and Noah's family, but then God interprets it. And that can whiz right past us modern readers. But at this point in history, a sign in the sky needs an interpreter, a shaman, to tell you what the sign in the sky means. But God gives the sign and then interprets it without a middleman. And also we can note that the word translated bow, that we are translating rainbow and thinking of as a rainbow, the word can be used to describe a rainbow, but it's primarily used in that time as like a bow and arrow, a weapon. At the time of the story being written, there was already a famous creation myth called the Enuma Elish, where a god named Marduk slays Tiamat, the sea monster, with the same word, with a bow, and arrow. And the bow he does it with is placed in the heavens as a star, the bright star Sirius, most likely. So when you look up in the sky and you see this bright star, you're supposed to remember the victory of the warrior god Marduk over Tiamat, the sea monster. So it's a memorial in the sky. So there's already precedent for heavenly weapons being put down in the sky when the violence ends as a memorial of glory and triumph and all that stuff. But there's a twist with the Noah story. The rainbow bow appears to be set down on the earth and therefore aimed away from the earth, which brings a really interesting twist to a cultural expectation of the time. The 13th century rabbi Nachmanides made this observation about God setting the bow down in that orientation. He says that it is indeed the way of warriors to invert the instruments of war which they hold in their hands when calling for peace from their opponents. Moreover, that the bow has no rope upon which to bend the arrows. So it might have brought Marduk's warring triumph and memorial to the minds of the very first readers, like, hey, we know this. But this sign for Noah is a memorial of peace, not war or triumph. Now, I also want to note this June that there's nothing about the colors of the rainbow that God interprets symbolically. There's nothing symbolically significant about the colors in the text. Now, we're free to make speculations, and people have, but it's the fact of it being a bow, a weapon retired in the name of peace. That's what we're told. It's not about a warning about future destruction. It's not a threat about what God can do if you come to the wrong conclusions or whatever. The colors aren't mentioned as having anything to do with the symbolism. It's the shape of it, the bow being put down. That's the highlight. So the pride flag, whether flown this month or the other 11, is not connected to this story. The colors of the pride flag represent different facets and the diversity of experiences within the LGBTQ plus community. So referencing the rainbow in Genesis as a criticism or a defense, whether you do it in a sermon or cleverly on your baseball cap, this is more willful misunderstanding of the text, and it's very often rooted in bigotry. Because it would be far more faithful to the Bible by folks concerned about taking the Bible seriously to reference the rainbow in Genesis in the name of ending oppression and violence. as a symbol of peace, stopping and standing in the gap of oppression and violence, and therefore providing peace and safety for the LGBTQ community. That's how you would more faithfully reference that part of the story. But sermons don't reverse bigotry. Only love can do that. So let me get back to the big question of, did this flood, the kill everything to remedy violence plan, did that work? If this is a parable to warn in its way of the eventual mass misery of unbridled violence, then we can engage it sincerely that way, and I think that we should. We can hold it as we might hold the parable of the Good Samaritan, understanding that it's got wisdom in it, but worrying about whether or not it actually happened, that misses the point. The wisdom of a parable isn't dependent on its non-fiction status. So similarly, we can appreciate the story, the flood, as an etiology. And an etiology is an explanation of something that you create after the fact to explain it. It's a reasoning story put together that people can adopt, like a fable or a mythology. Like, here's a little one. The divot you've got on your top lip, I learned growing up that that's called a shusher, because that's where an angel touches their finger on a newborn when they're crying to shush them. So that's an example of an inconsequential little mythological etiology. And you have yours from your family or your region as well. Genesis has several of these etiological stories, and they're amazing, and they have all kinds of wisdom in them. But if we try and take them literally, then we're going to leave ourselves further from the truth, not closer to it. So if we're compelled to receive this as a biography of real people, real events, God's real thoughts, actions, and feelings, then we're going to get stuck with some very difficult problems and some hard answers to the question about the effectiveness of this whole plan. Like, how can God not understand that this wasn't going to work? These are tough questions about why anyone would think it was effective to inflict the worst mass extinction event in history on the planet and then think that that would improve anything. So moving along through the text, the next chapters of Genesis show that things eventually dry out. Noah dies a couple hundred years later. Things reset. And it says, now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Now, don't miss it. Bricks and mortar hold and stack and are better than stacking rocks and logs. This is a technological advancement, but an advancement not for medicine or science. They're making a tower, and a tower is a military structure. They want to build a military structure all the way to heaven, because the higher you build it, the further out you can see. This is about domination, intimidation. It presents them all as one people, sure, but their behavior is preparation not just for conflict, but for war. Let us make a name for ourselves. Let's be powerful people that nobody can ever get an advantage on. It says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, look, they're one people. They have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. You can read this as an ancient caution that maybe because you can do something, that doesn't mean you should. How many seemingly benign or even benignly intended inventions in our modern world are things that we're like, I kind of wish this didn't exist. This is going badly. This is being used in a bad way. This is an ancient caution that when people get together and start making things, especially building big, intimidating, impenetrable structures that are rooted in a kind of ambition of getting your name respected, they start creating things in a world that seems to be more rooted in the invention of inflicted pain and destruction more than inventing what would improve and bless life. This is a caution. It's only a matter of time now. Things are going to go badly again. Come, God says, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off the building of the city. They didn't finish the project. Therefore, it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. This is where we get our word babble, babbling. It comes from this story. Suddenly people couldn't understand each other. Couldn't understand each other, which I'm sure increased tension, and finally people moved away, and that was that. Now, again, this is not literal history. This is not at all how the many different languages of the world originated. We know that. But it's an incredible etiology, the answering of a question that maybe a child used to ask. Why is it so hard to get along with people? Why is it so hard to collaborate? Why are there so many languages and dialects and traditions? Frankly, why is it so hard to understand even the people that speak your language and come from where you come from? Understand, the story of people getting so violent that God had to out-violent them and kill everybody and all their animals for peace. And then within a couple of generations, people come right back online, building military structures, positioning themselves for glory. This was not intended to teach us what God is actually like, because it's showing us that the plan didn't work. It sprayed the problem down with 1 trillion gallons of water, but it didn't fix anything because it didn't address anything. We know that that's not actual divine wisdom, let alone love. And we can confidently assess this from knowing Jesus. Jesus says, if you've seen me, you have seen the Father. I am what the Father is like. No one can reasonably imagine Jesus drowning kids and their dogs because he couldn't think of another way to get them to stop fighting. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. But that doesn't mean that the story doesn't have any truth to offer us, because it gets at something we can observe. People, especially people under stress, they end up stepping all over each other. They will engage each other and themselves and the world they inhabit more and more from fear and pain that multiplies fear and pain in the other. And it gets to a point where when we just can't take it anymore, it seems like, you know what needs to happen? Somebody just needs to come and hit the reset button. We just need to get rid of all of them so that we could be happy. Just wipe it all away, flood it, nuke it. Just, you know what, I'm leaving. I'm just going to leave it all behind. But that doesn't solve the problems. It floods and nukes and avoids the problems, but it doesn't solve the problems because there's no understanding. We know in our hearts, and frankly with our eyes and ears if we're paying any attention, that the problem of broken connection between any 2 or 2 million people, of disconnection, of using primarily the lens of suspicion stories for relating to one another, for hearing one another. The problem of making decisions chiefly from a habit of protecting ourselves from pain and misunderstanding. All of this makes the same problems come back to us again and again and again. And frankly, it can make those problems worse. It can make them return more bitterly if our previous attempts at addressing them was just to squash them, to inflict pain, to nuke or flood them. So imagine the people post-flood, the inherited violent, divisive instinct of a people born out of a grieved wrath flood. It didn't work in the story of Genesis, and it's not going to work for you or I. So I don't claim to have all of the solutions, but I want to spend the rest of our time highlighting what we're part of and why it matters that we find a way to participate in it in our real lives as well as possible. After Jesus is crucified, buried, he's risen again. He speaks to a handful of his followers here and there in his resurrected form, and then he disappears. And by the second chapter of the book of Acts, we see the disciples huddled together, a couple dozen of them or so, in an upper room, trying to figure out what the heck do we do next. This happened during what's called the Feast of Pentecost, which is a Jewish holiday. It's held 50 days after the Passover. It celebrates the giving of the law of Moses, among other things. But it came to be a Christian holiday because it came to be seen as the birth of the church. So all these Jewish people are in and around Jerusalem from all over the known world, coming from hundreds of miles in all directions, from places they and their families had lived for centuries as multi-generational exiles. They're pilgrims here this week for this sacred holiday. And we know that with all the joy that's in the air for this holiday, there's a lot of tension because they're exhausted. And some of them are broke, but they still have some spending to do. And there's all the overcrowding. And there's all the difference in the air. And then on top of all that, there's the monitoring of the Roman soldiers from Fortress Antonia, those towers that overlook the temple as they glare and look forebodingly, holding their weapons. All of these and multiple other factors. There's a lot of joy in the air, but things are tense. Acts 2 reads, when the day of Pentecost had come, the disciples were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound, like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues, as of fire, appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now, there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. Well, at least they were that week. So you can imagine traffic was awful. There's so many people from everywhere. And at this sound, the crowd gathered. They all came toward the sound. And they were bewildered because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each of them. That word bewildered, sometimes rendered confused or confounded. It's the exact same ancient Greek word used in the ancient Greek versions of Genesis to describe the confusion at the Tower of Babel, which I think is supposed to make us lean in. I think. Amazed and astonished, they asked, aren't these guys who are speaking Galileans? That's not a compliment, by the way. Like, how are they speaking all these languages? Aren't they just Galileans? How is it that we each hear, each of us, in our own native language? So do you notice they have native languages? They don't all speak Hebrew or Aramaic, let alone Greek. They speak languages from the disconnected places they have lived, many of them, for generations. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I would have guessed that the miracle here would be, and all the devout Jews came to the holy city, and God gave them the ability to understand Hebrew, the language of their Bibles, their language. But the pilgrims, they're not given the gift of ears. And then the disciples tell them the news. There's a reversal happening. The disconnect from the flood, the tower in Genesis. But it isn't just a reversal, because now there's love and understanding in it. So rather than the Spirit making all these different people able to understand the good news of their Messiah having finally arrived in the language of the disciples, the miracle was the Spirit enabling the disciples, the followers of Christ, to speak their language. Why? Well, I would submit that based on the way love actually functions between any two or any 2 million people, that we can safely assume that it's because once you decide that you want to communicate within the way of love, it is far better to communicate a desire for understanding of their world than to demand understanding of yours. Of course, the story in Acts is about the communication of the gospel to those 100,000 or so pilgrims and the birth of the church, the reversal of disconnection and confusion by way of the divine healing presence of the Christ. Of course, that's what this story is. And yet, there's another principle behind all of this that's true for every way that we engage one another as students of the way of love in every facet of our lives. This is why Paul told his friends in Philippi all those years later, do nothing from selfish ambition or empty conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. What's important to them? Lift that up. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though existed in the form of God, didn't regard equality with God as something to be clung to. You must regard me as divine. But emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, assuming human likeness. Where there is a divide, love slows down and speaks the language of the other as much as is possible. When conflict happens, an absolute inevitability because we're all sloppy buffoons who are hilarious and beautiful all at the same time. But it's not if. When conflict happens between us, we slow down and we imagine the great gift of the Spirit being ours, endowing us with the ability to deal in the other person feeling understood first. Not simply looking at behavior and making up our mind from that, not flooding or nuking, and not demanding, here's what'll make things better, learn my language. It deals in the other person feeling understood first, speaking their language, because love doesn't prioritize or demand being understood, but first speaks in a way that shows, I understand, or I would like to. This absolutely means I am speaking your language, not telling you that you have to speak mine. Again, Pentecost is about the communication of the gospel of Christ to a Jewish diaspora. But if you're also looking around this world, the grocery store parking lot, your own family get-togethers, your love relationships, and maybe you've even found that those things are not going the way you wish they were, and you find yourself praying, if you are praying to the Spirit of Christ, then I can tell you the answer is probably going to be an invitation for you to learn to metabolize conflict without engaging in war. It'll be about you learning that you can lift up the interests of others, and that's not erasing yourself, because understanding breeds understanding. The same Spirit at Pentecost is likely to teach you and I seek to understand first. First and foremost, make sure the other person feels understood, not agreed with. You're not very often going to agree with everything other people say, especially during conflict. That's probably why there's conflict. But seek first to make sure the other person feels understood. Not agreed with necessarily, but considered enough to feel understood, that what they are feeling is being understood without my defensiveness, without me becoming angry or afraid or confused about me suddenly putting all my energy toward what I intended. You took that wrong. That's not what I meant, or on and on and on. Because remember, impact, the impact I have, and the intention, what I meant, those are different. And if I focus on my intention when somebody else is hurt or disappointed or angry or whatever it is, if I focus on my intention rather than the impact first, then I'm not speaking the other person's language. I'm demanding that they properly understand me. I promise it doesn't work. And so the Spirit is inviting me to say, in any context, I'm going to make you feel understood first. I am going to make you feel understood now, and then later, maybe no less than 24 hours later, if it still seems to matter, then I will ask the other person if they have the bandwidth and the patience for me to try to be understood. Whether in your personal relationships or just observing the behavior of others that makes your eyes want to pop out and roll across the floor, you and I have a responsibility and a duty right now that, because, I mean, maybe it's just because I have a bad memory, I can't remember it ever feeling as important as it does right now for the people of love to actually go into the world and embody this love consistently, universally. Because people, everywhere you go, they're so wound up, so tense, so divided, so starved and strained of hope. And I don't just observe it. I'm often feeling this too, and I bet you are. As that feeling grows, there's a temptation to believe, you know what? The world could be flooded into improvement. We could just get rid of all the people that are like this, and you know. And so we have our gossip about those idiots over there, and our debate-ready right answers for things that those people always get wrong, and we have our disgust, and we have more cynicism than hope. And a lot of that's not a symptom of not trying. Again, like other people's willful ignorance and bigotry, that's not something to shrug at, right? But if we are carrying the name of love, and most of us carry it with a limp, that's okay. We must each day breathe in the hopefulness of its Spirit and learn to speak the language of love which always sincerely attempts to lift up the other and make them feel understood, beyond what I find disagreeable in what they maybe have said or what they do. Beyond that, beyond what's disagreeable to me, and into who are they? What is their story? To prioritize that more than ever, we have got to, us people of love, we've got to find a way to apply that together. Because if it was the preferred communication of the good news of Christ, we can be sure it's suitable and worth our embrace for transmitting all of our love as well. And so may we be a people who find ourselves reversing the flood, the Tower of Babel, and that great confused disconnect that happened, but not just reversing it, but coming back to it and bringing to it Christ's love in all the really grand, huge ways, but no less in our day-to-day, moment-to-moment interactions with all of our brothers and sisters and siblings and friends. May we be about it. Amen.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.